So, I want you to try a little thought experiment to kick things off today.
Hmm.
I want you to imagine that you have just been tasked with taking over like 1/3 of the entire planet.
Okay, that is quite the promotion.
Right. But here are the ground rules for your campaign. Your starting point is a completely frozen wasteland. You have absolutely no maps of the surrounding continents, no roads, no industrial infrastructure, and practically no steady food supply.
I mean, it sounds like a dark comedy sketch or, the setup to an incredibly punishing video game where the developers just want you to fail right out of the gate.
It really does sound like a joke. But according to standard history books, that is not a game. That is exactly what happened with the Mongol Empire. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
We are unpacking a really fascinating stack of material today, centered around this highly passionate, fiercely skeptical monologue that attempts to just completely dismantle this entire historical narrative.
Yeah, it's quite a read.
Our mission today is to evaluate the history of the Mongol Empire entirely through the lens of a historical skeptic. We are going to look at the accepted story of Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan and ask, does this timeline completely defy basic geography?
Right. And does it defy military logistics?
Exactly. And honestly, does it just defy plain common sense?
To set the tone right out of the gate here, we are exploring some material that eventually touches on alternative history theories. We are not here to endorse those theories, nor are we trying to completely rewrite the global historical record.
Yeah, absolutely not.
The goal of this deep dive is just to impartially explore these skeptical arguments, really to exercise our critical thinking muscles. We are looking at the physical mechanics of history, like the actual nuts and bolts of moving human bodies across a landscape, rather than just passively accepting the grand narrative we were all handed in, middle school history class.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because where this specific skeptical breakdown begins is, it's one of the funniest, most bizarre modern catalysts you could possibly ask for.
It really is.
The guy who authored our source material was just messing around with AI image generators. He was trying to get the software to create a realistic portrait of himself as Temujin, which is Genghis Khan's birth name.
Which is already, a pretty strange way to spend a Tuesday afternoon. But the technology is fascinating.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And the AI just kept glitching out in the most absurd ways. It kept adding like 15 to 20 pounds to his frame for no reason.
Right, just bulking him up.
Yeah. And it would generate these dramatic images where he's sitting in this frozen historical-looking bath. But for some inexplicable reason, the AI kept putting a bright yellow modern rubber ducky floating in the freezing water right next to him.
Ah, yes, the fearsome Mongolian war duck, a crucial piece of historical technology.
It gets even weirder. The AI tried to dress him in this modern, fast-fashion, Zara-style calico pattern instead of actual armor.
Oh, wow.
And in one of the prompts where he tried to combine different historical and modern figures, the generator just spat out this weird, unsettling mashup of him and Elon Musk just standing out on the step.
So while that's a very funny visual, that glitchy synthetic recreation is what actually triggered this entire mechanical breakdown of history.
Yeah.
Seeing this completely fabricated, nonsensical image of Genghis Khan prompted him to go look at the official accepted maps of the Great Mongol State. Specifically, the maps showing their territorial expansion between the years 1200 and 1260 AD.
And those maps are staggering when you actually stop and look at them. They claim that this empire conquered and governed a third of the known world, expanding to that incomprehensible size over roughly 200 years.
It's a massive amount of land.
To really grasp the absurdity of what that map is claiming, the material uses an analogy that I absolutely love. It uses the state of Texas as a baseline.
Texas is the perfect geographical anchor for a thought experiment like this, mainly because it is already difficult for the human brain to comprehend its size.
It is huge. The analogy describes Texas as being like the eye of Jupiter. You could theoretically fit like 1,000 Pennsylvanias inside of it. Yeah. Think about the last time you flew across the United States. You could look out the window, see you're over Texas, fall asleep for 2 solid hours, wake up, look out the window again, and you are still flying over Texas.
Yeah, it just keeps going.
Now, apply that scale to the Mongol maps. Those historical maps claim that territories 5 times the size of Texas are just popping into existence under nomadic control, holding together, and then vanishing just as fast.
And that establishes the skeptic's foundational premise, which is a pure conflict of scale. The sheer, unbelievable size of the landmass creates an immediate glaring conflict with the biological reality of human reproduction.
Oh, that's a really good point.
When you look at a map coloring in a third of the Earth, you have to ask a very practical, mechanical question. Who is actually holding this territory? How is a sparsely populated nomadic tribe reproducing fast enough to physically populate, garrison, and govern regions that massive?
Right, because conquering is one thing. You can ride a horse through a town and say, I own this now. But governing it?
Exactly. Governing requires an administrative state. It requires tax collectors, localized military garrisons to prevent rebellion, infrastructure to communicate laws.
Yeah, you need actual boots on the ground.
The math of human reproduction, the time it takes to gestate, raise, and train a human being, alongside the physics of traveling across that much land on horseback, it simply does not align with the speed of conquest shown on those institutional maps. You cannot multiply a small tribal population into a global administrative force in that time frame.
And if the sheer biological scale is that problematic, we have to look at the starting line of this conquest. The geography of where this massive global campaign supposedly launched from makes the story even harder to swallow.
Yes, the starting point is key.
We are talking about the Mongolian steppe.
To understand the skeptic's argument here, you have to understand what the steppe actually is. It is essentially a void.
A freezing, desolate void. The winter temperatures routinely plunge to like -30 degrees. And the environment is just as lousy and inhospitable today as it was in 1200 AD. We are talking about a landscape where nomadic tents are 50 miles apart from each other, just so their small herds have enough sparse grass to survive.
This is where the logistical argument really takes root. A military campaign of global conquest does not materialize through sheer willpower or charisma.
No, it doesn't. Our material brings in some brilliant pop culture analogies to hammer this home. Think about the movie Taps, the 1981 film, with Tom Cruise and Sean Penn.
Right, great movie.
In that movie, they are at a military academy, and the very first thing first-grade military school teaches you is that military campaigns require deep infrastructure. To move an army, you need railroads, or at least paved roads.
You need a base.
Exactly. You need an industrial base capable of forging steel weapons. You need a massive agricultural surplus to feed soldiers who are no longer farming for themselves. The steppe possesses absolutely zero of this infrastructure.
It lacks the fundamental building blocks of an industrial war machine.
There is a second movie analogy used that paints the picture perfectly, and that's Dances with Wolves. Remember the scene where the character Timmons is driving the wagon out to the absolute edge of the frontier?
Oh, yeah. He just stops and looks out.
He stops, looks out at the horizon, and says, "There's nothing down there, Lieutenant." That is the reality of the Mongolian steppe in the 13th century. It is a whole lot of nothing.
Connecting this to the broader reality of military history, logistics are the entire foundation of conquest. The argument here is very grounded. Attempting to mobilize a massive force without a pre-existing supply chain, without even basic geographical knowledge of neighboring regions like Siberia or Kurdistan or Tajikistan, is not a military campaign.
No, it
is a mass death sentence. You are just marching people into the desert to die.
So let me push back on that for a second, because this is the first thing that popped into my head when I read this. Couldn't they have just sent scouts?
It's a fair question.
Right. You don't just march an entire army blindly into the dark. You send guys on horseback ahead to figure out where the water is, draw a map, and bring it back.
That assumes the environment allows for traditional scouting. In a European forest, yes. On the Eurasian steppe, the math of scouting breaks down completely.
And the breakdown of that scout theory is fascinating. Think about the reality of the year 1200. You couldn't just walk into a friendly neighboring settlement, ask the guy behind the counter for a topographic map of the next 1,000 miles, and grab an ice cream sandwich for the road.
Right, there are no pit stops.
To scout that territory in every direction, riding on a camel or riding a chameleon or an iguana, as the material jokes, would take decades. It would take 20 years of riding just to figure out where a massive army could physically stop for the night without dying of thirst.
The information gap is terrifying when you look at the mechanics. Moving tens of thousands of men requires moving hundreds of thousands of horses because a cavalry army needs remounts.
Oh, right, the horses.
And a single horse needs several gallons of water a day. A scout might survive by finding a tiny oasis or a small puddle, but if you bring an army of that size to a small watering hole, the horses will drain it dry in 60 seconds, and then the entire army dies in the sun the next day. You
Wow.
need precise knowledge of massive rivers and grazing lands that simply do not exist in a neat line across the void.
So, if the physical geography guarantees your supply lines will fail, the immediate question becomes, how do you even convince a human being to march into that void in the first place? We have to move from the physical environment to human psychology.
This is a crucial pivot. Grand historical narratives almost completely ignore the granular individual motivation of the people actually holding the spears.
Just imagine the pitch meeting for this world domination plan. Picture Genghis Khan Temujin sitting around a tiny freezing campfire with a few tribal leaders. Now, I want you to imagine the reality of the soldiers he is pitching this idea to.
It's a hard sell.
He is asking them to abandon whatever meager, fragile survival setup they have built. He wants them to go spend weeks, months, or years sleeping in the frozen mud, starving, exhausted, leaving behind a wife who might be 8 months pregnant.
When you are a nomadic tribe living in an incredibly harsh climate, mere survival takes 100% of your daily caloric and mental energy. There is no surplus energy for abstract concepts like empire.
Put yourself in the shoes of that hypothetical soldier. You would look at this leader and say, what exactly are we doing out here sleeping in the dirt to make this pudgy guy rich?
Exactly.
Why would you voluntarily walk hundreds of miles toward, as the guy in our source material hilariously put it, toward Borat's sister in Tajikistan, when there is zero immediate payoff for you or your starving family?
The idea that a single leader could convince tens of thousands of people to completely override their basic evolutionary survival instincts to march into a wasteland, it just contradicts everything we understand about human nature. People fight to protect their immediate resources, not to acquire abstract lines on a map thousands of miles away.
To explain how absurd our accepted view of history really is, there's a brilliant analogy here about the turn of the millennium. Think back to the year 2000, turning into 2001.
Oh, the New Year's Eve analogy.
Yeah, we have this pervasive idea that massive historical events are carefully orchestrated by a few guys in a smoky room planning things decades in advance. The joke is that while a few elites might be sitting around using esoteric calendars to plan the geopolitical events of September 2001, the great unwashed masses are just sitting on their couches watching Dick Clark drop the ball in Times Square on New Year's Eve.
It highlights the disconnect between organic, messy human reality and the manufactured narratives we read in textbooks. History does not unfold like a meticulously written movie script.
It doesn't start with one guy raising his hand at a tribal meeting and saying, hey, everyone, I have a fun idea. Let's take over the entire planet. And then everyone just claps, packs their bags, and flawlessly executes a 200-year military campaign.
Life is messy.
Real life is so messy. People are selfish, they're tired, and mostly they just want to stay warm.
If we accept that the geographic scale is impossible, the supply chain infrastructure is non-existent, and the human motivation is entirely lacking, we have to look at the traditional counter-argument.
Right.
Institutional history usually attempts to wave all of this away by claiming the Mongols possessed an overwhelming, unprecedented military and technological advantage.
And this is where the skeptical lens just completely shatters the official story.
Wow.
Because if you actually look at the archaeological and historical record of what the Golden Horde supposedly wore and fought with, it's practically nothing. They had no heavy industry.
Without blast furnaces and a sedentary mining class, you cannot produce steel armor or steel weapons at scale.
They didn't have steel helmets. They likely didn't even have standard steel swords for the rank and file.
Yeah.
What they wore into battle were basically pieces of hardened leather fastened together.
Just scraps, really.
Think back to Dances with Wolves again. It's like the scene where the Native American character trades for the cavalry soldier's jacket. That is clothing. That is trading scraps. That is not a unified military-industrial complex capable of conquering walled Chinese cities.
Yet, the history books often claim they possessed a very specific, almost magical technological advantage to compensate for this lack of heavy armor.
The silk vests. I actually had to stop reading and laugh when I saw this. The official accepted historical claim is that Genghis Khan issued his entire massive army silk vests.
The logic being arrow protection.
Right. The reasoning provided by historians is that if an arrow hits a soldier, it won't pierce the silk. Instead, it pushes the silk into the wound, wrapping the fabric around the arrowhead, which allows the medics on the battlefield to easily pull the arrow right out without tearing the flesh.
Conceptually, it sounds incredibly advanced. It sounds like a stroke of tactical genius.
It sounds like pure high fantasy. I mean, the material compares this directly to Mithril from The Lord of the Rings.
The elven chainmail.
Yes. The magical, impenetrable elven chainmail that Frodo wears. Because when you stop treating this like a fantasy novel and actually think about the physical reality of producing that much silk, the entire narrative collapses.
Let's break down the mechanics of extreme resource scarcity here. What is silk? It is not a plant you can just harvest. It is an animal byproduct. You need a very specific insect, the silkworm.
And a lot of them.
Yes, and you need thousands of acres of mulberry trees just to feed those worms. You have to carefully harvest the cocoons, boil them at precise temperatures, extract the microscopically thin threads, and weave them together. Historically, in the 13th century, silk was an ultra-luxury commodity. It was reserved strictly for the 1% of the 1%, royalty and elite merchants.
You cannot just bang out silk like it's cheap polyester or rayon at a fast fashion factory. Genghis Khan couldn't just flip an industrial switch on the frozen steppe and say, "All right, boys, report to the quartermaster. New boots and impenetrable silk vests for everyone today."
This encapsulates the skeptic's entire view perfectly. The history books are claiming a logistical miracle that entirely ignores the economic and biological realities of resource production.
It's totally disconnected from reality.
It is completely plausible to say a king or a top general had a silk vest obtained through trade. It is an entirely different universe of logistics to claim an army of 100,000 nomadic horsemen living in a freezing desert without a textile industry were all uniformly outfitted in woven insect thread.
So, if the geography guarantees starvation, the soldiers had zero motivation to leave home, the resources to build weapons and armor didn't exist, and the logistics were basically mass suicide, why do we have all these history books?
That is the big question.
Even the author of this material admits there are stacks and stacks of books going back to the 1200s and 1300s full of incredibly specific details about the Mongol horde that perfectly align with Chinese historical records.
If the mechanics of the story are impossible, why is the documentation so vast and thorough?
And this is where the thought experiment gets a little existential. Because the official story defies the laws of physics and common sense so thoroughly for the skeptic, he starts leaning into some pretty wild alternative explanations to make sense of the paperwork.
Right, the alternative theories.
He brings up researchers who study the mud flood and Tartaria.
For context, the Tartaria theory is an alternative history concept. It suggests that a vast, technologically advanced, and peaceful global empire called Tartaria existed in the relatively recent past.
Okay.
The theory posits that its existence was deliberately erased and covered up by a catastrophic, world-resetting event, often called a mud flood, and that our current historical narrative was essentially rewritten by the victors to hide the truth.
The argument is that when these Tartaria researchers look at the Mongol Empire, they see a massive cover story. They believe the incredible vast lands attributed to the savage Mongols were actually the borders of peaceful Tartaria.
Interesting shift in perspective.
And the skepticism goes even further, suggesting that we might live in a sort of fluid, conspiracy-producing reality generation machine. The idea is that reality itself just manifests these stacks of ancient books to cover up the logical holes in the timeline.
Here's where we need to step back and look at the psychology behind these theories. We are not endorsing the Tartaria theory, nor are we claiming reality is a fluid simulation generating fake books.
Definitely not.
But we have to understand why intelligent people arrive at these extreme conclusions. It ultimately comes down to cognitive dissonance.
Walk me through how cognitive dissonance creates a hidden empire.
When the official institutional historical record presents you with a glaring logistical impossibility, like a world-spanning empire built by freezing nomads with zero resources wearing magical silk vests, your brain experiences intense friction. It creates profound cognitive dissonance.
In sense.
For a deeply analytical skeptic, when faced with that friction, it is actually easier for their brain to believe that the historical timeline itself is a fabricated illusion, an outer ring of reality, than it is to accept that millions of people somehow defied the laws of physics, agriculture, and human nature without leaving any physical infrastructure behind.
That is wild.
Yeah.
The brain literally short circuits. It says, the math on the horse's water supply and the silkworms is so demonstrably wrong that the entire universe must be lying to me about the 13th century.
Precisely. The skepticism and the resulting alternative theory becomes a coping mechanism for resolving the dissonance. If the mechanical details of the story do not make sense, the entire framework of the story must be a lie.
That is a fascinating way to look at how we process information. Let's wrap this up. What we've done today was never about trying to rewrite the history of the 13th century or prove a conspiracy.
Right, it's about the method.
It was about adopting a fiercely skeptical lens to look at the actual mechanics of history. By questioning the brutal geography of the steppe, the reality of horse-driven supply lines, and the sheer biological impossibility of outfitting an army with insect thread, we can see just how fragile some of these grand historical narratives look when you put them under a mechanical microscope.
I would encourage you, the listener, to apply this exact same mechanical lens to your own life. When you are presented with a grand narrative, whether you are reading a breaking news article about a new tech startup, studying a business case in a boardroom, or reading a biography, do not just passively accept the sweeping arrows on the map.
Be curious.
Ask the mechanical questions. Ask who made the boots? Where'd the drinking water come from? Does the math of this story actually add up on a human level?
It fundamentally changes the way you look at everything you read, which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought to chew on.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the unimaginably massive logistical footprint of an ancient empire like the Mongols could somehow be entirely erased by time and weather to the point where there's nothing left but a frozen void and stacks of old books, what currently invisible, incredibly complex logistical miracles are holding our modern world together right now? What invisible systems do we rely on today that are just waiting to be doubted as completely impossible by future skeptics 1,000 years from now?
1,000 years from now, a future historian might look at the rusted remains of a massive internet server farm in the middle of a desert and say, well, there is no physical way they generated enough water and power to cool this building. The internet must be a myth.
Imagine trying to explain cloud computing to someone from a frozen wasteland. It all comes back to the math.